Welcome back. Our big focus, India's technology push. The world is today looking at India not only for critical technology, but also for offering quick, economical and accurate tech solutions to the developing world to carve our own path in an increasingly competitive world of digitalization. Joining us on the broadcast, Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya, a digital policy expert. He is also the founder and president of the Center for Digital Economy Policy Research. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Bhattacharya. You know, the examples of NavIC, of UPI, of ONDC, do you see a shift in prism through which the tech world has been seen so far? And is India creating a parallel paradigm that puts the perspective of the global south in focus as compared to the West-driven narrative around tech innovations?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, there is a significant difference between the NavIC and the other two that you mentioned, which is, ONDC and UPI and so on. And the difference is basically this, that we are now the fifth nation in the world having a GPS system, which is NavIC. For those who don't know what NavIC is, it's essentially the Indian GPS version. China has its own, Europe has its own, Russia has its own, and now India has built its own GPS version. So we have always been the third country or the fifth country or the fourth country doing something. And I think when we started off with the BrahMos missile, we became the first country in the world to have a supersonic cruise missile. But that too was along with Russian collaboration. So what we have been doing is consistently trying to play catch up. Now, that still does not make us a technology leader. It does redefine the relationship that we are not a technology importer. We can create our own technologies. And that is an important step forward. However, we also need to define what is the next generation of technologies that is needed globally, which is where Aadhaar and UPI and our digital public infrastructure, DigiLocker, are a stupendous achievement, because here we have defined what the world needs. We were the first in the world to do this at a scale which is unprecedented, unheard of. 1.4 billion people coming under one single digital infrastructure was never thought possible, and least of all to be done by India.
Right. In fact, smartphone manufacturers like Apple, Samsung and Xiaomi have in the past been asked to make their phones NavIC compatible. But do you see this materializing in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me go back into the history of NavIC. So NavIC as a project was conceived in India because during the Kargil war, when we needed to have GPS data of the locations in Kargil, it was denied to us by the US government. And in fact, we had also bought mapping software and so on. And the small text in that mapping software was that it cannot be used during times of war. Now, why else would the military buy a mapping software if they cannot use it during the time of war? And so it became clear that India needs to develop its own navigation system. It did take 20 years to build it, but we are where we are now. Now, in that process, ISRO did its own job, which was to put up the satellites in the space. So, as you know, GPS or NavIC system is based on satellites, and you need to have very, very precise clocks, which are driven by atomic clocks, which then drive what is the time at which the signals are sent. And based on that timing, the position is calculated. So this is an extremely complex piece of technology that works up there. Now, on the ground, you would need microprocessor chips, which would be able to take these signals, triangulate, and tell you what is your position.
But the emergence of indigenous tech in the global south, it's designed prioritizing the needs of the developing world and can be adapted worldwide, as we've seen. But is this viewed as a refreshing alternative for the West or more a threat? How do you see this?
So there are a couple of threads going on from a technology geopolitics. One is obviously the China plus one factor, which has led to the issue of supply chain resilience. If a large amount of supply and manufacturing is based on China being a critical factor in that supply chain, and if China decides not to provide those equipment or uses it as a weaponization of diplomacy, which is what they did with Japan when they stopped the critical raw materials, critical minerals being sent to Japan, which is important for electronics. it was basically war being played out in a different way. And we have seen the same threat coming in from China in the recent years during the COVID time. And hence it's important that the world moves towards a more diversified supply chain, which is where India plays a very critical role. In the modern world, it is not right to believe that we can have our independent, completely indigenous supply chain, everything being within India, although that's what everybody else is trying. That's what US is trying, that's what Germany is trying, Europe is trying, and perhaps we should try it to an extent that is feasible.
Right. Also, Jaijit, let's touch upon another important factor. Now, after the success of the UPI, India is now looking to usher in another digital revolution. It's quite clear. But this time in the e-commerce space. The Indian e-commerce sector, which is currently valued at about $46.2 billion back in 2020, it's poised to touch the $188 billion mark by 2025. You think ONDC has the potential to be a real market disruptor in the presence of e-commerce giants like the Amazons and Flipkarts?
There's no doubt about it. It's only a matter of time. It's not like a magic wand that you wave and it'll happen overnight. But ONDC will democratize e-commerce. What is happening is monopoly is shifting from smaller chains and distributors to these large e-commerce retailers. Imagine if all supply chain is controlled by Walmart, which is the owner of Flipkart, and by Amazon, which is also a US company. And, if India chooses to test another nuclear bomb and US under the Patriot Act says that no US company will be allowed to operate in India. And there is precedence to it. The same thing happened in Iran. The same thing happened in many other countries. We will be in trouble. We need to maintain our technological sovereignty. And within that, therefore, it is important to have, a core Indian play in e-commerce. And not just a core Indian play, but an Indian play which is democratized and not controlled by other monopolies and digital monopolies in that sense. And hence, it's very important that we ensure that ONDC is a success. What ONDC does is it disaggregates e-commerce and allows multiple players to plug in on the fly. So you can have somebody becoming the distributor, somebody becoming the seller, somebody can becoming the stockist, and so on and so forth. And ONDC allows that to happen. Therefore, it will again be a platform which will lead to an explosion of innovation happening on top of ONDC. Now, ONDC itself is enabled by basic core digital platform, digital public initiatives and infrastructure that we have developed, starting with Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, and so on, based on which we are now developing the next level of digital public infrastructure, which is ONDC, based on which, again, you will see a whole plethora of innovation that will be coming up. We see large ERP players such as Oracle and SAP actually scrambling to try and get their applications connected to ONDC. These are all signs that ONDC will surely be a success. And once it's a success, it'll be a tremendous game changer, not just in India, but globally.
So, the key takeaway being we need to maintain our technological sovereignty. Thank you so much for joining us, Jaijit. It was a pleasure to chat with you. With that, we're slipping into a very short break. News and updates continue on NDTV 24/7. Do stay tuned.